It is Level Up Your Literacy Centers, episode 1, and we're talking all about where to start when you don't know where to start. My first year teaching, I was required to have literacy centers in my 3rd grade reading and social studies classroom, and I remember feeling so overwhelmed because I had never done centers before and I had no idea where to start. So maybe you're feeling the same way because the centers that you've done in the past aren't working, or you're doing centers for the very first time. The first 3 things you need to do all have to do with the structure for your centers. The first thing that you need to keep in mind is the time for your centers. How long are you planning on spending for centers time during the day, and what will that look like? In my classroom, I spend 45 minutes approximately during centers time, so that breaks down to 2 20-minute rotations and then 5 minutes of wiggle room flex time. So that 5-minute time may be me reinforcing some expectations at the beginning, and then some rotation time just in case we're taking a little bit of extra time cleaning up. Once you have that time in place, it'll help you plan your literacy block as a whole and get a feel for how your centers block will look all week long. And the next thing that you need to start thinking about is, what centers do you need in your classroom? When I taught 3rd grade and I was focusing on reading and social studies, my centers looked a lot different than they do now being a 1st grade teacher. When I taught 3rd grade, I did a lot of integration in my centers, and I had a center that was specifically for the content we were focusing on during social studies block, and it was really great to blend both of those subjects together. Now that I teach 1st grade, my centers are more heavily based on writing and word work and independent reading, so that my students can be gaining that stamina and those skills that they need to be prepared for those upper grades. The last thing I want you to consider for your centers is the setup of your classroom. When I say setup, I mean, where do you want your students completing their centers? That could mean students are grabbing materials and taking them back to their seat for seat work. Students are rotating in their groups to different stations around the room in a more traditional manner, or students are doing something like a centers folder or using their book bin for storage so that they can take it to areas some of the time and do kind of a hybrid model as they're completing a task throughout the week. There are so many ways that you can do this. In my room, I do a little bit of a combination here. There are some centers where I allow my students flexible seating and let them know that they can choose a spot anywhere in the room, and then other centers where I ask that they stay at their seat. So you need to think about what would work best for the setup of your classroom and the circumstances that you have in your room. As you're making decisions for your centers, I am guiding you with where to start, and then I'm going to talk you through all of the different components of my centers to give you some inspiration for what might be helpful in your classroom. And I just want you to remember that when you're designing your centers, you're looking for what works best in your classroom, and remembering that it is kind of a process and you're working through and building up to what will work best in your room. So as you're working through leveling up your literacy centers, I hope that you can find the perfect set of centers and routines that work best for you and your students. Make sure you tune in next week to level up your literacy centers so you can find the next set of tips.